One thing to keep in mind when working through the Phaistos disc is that some of the words are marked, and nobody knows what that means. The best bet is the words are marked because they're important, but they could be breathing marks or pronunciation marks. Not as likely, but not impossible. So I'll start by walking through every word marked on the disc. There are exactly a dozen of them. Iquekuria and yoye iquekuria. Two of the words seem yoked together. As a heads up, whenever I'm working with a marked word, I box it up in a red square, something like a cartouche. After all, the mark might be a Minoan version of the Egyptian cartouche, and I red letter the Romanized version of the word. Kuria is a word I zero in on, and there are two other incarnations of the word attached to two different suffixes, kuriaque and kuriate. Neither are marked. Ique paieriu, but not paie, or paieresa, or soti paieriu. I zero in on these words. Thiti, althiti, tithiti, but not wathitique. I'm going out on a little limb with this. This is deity, God, or a god. Here's an interesting quote showing a known Minoan influence on Greek religion. It's probably important when reading the disc. One big surprise is the almost complete absence from Mycenaean seals of representations of ecstatic divine epiphany. There is persuasive linguistic and textual evidence that the Mycenaean Greeks were influenced by Minoan notions of divine apparition in constructing their beliefs of what gods are and how they manifest themselves to human beings. They, and the later Greeks, used a word for deity, theos, constructed from a different Indo-European root than in other Indo-European cultures. Especially when used in compound words, the root thes conveys the peculiar sense of the eerily instantaneous presence of a supernatural force. Yet, unlike the Minoans, the Mycenaeans did not attempt to display this aspect of divinity pictorially. Now notice this little thing we got going on here with deity and theos. You see how I always pronounce the d as a th? That's because this is an old Indo-European language spoken by bona fide Aryans. So we have the same fuzziness with the d and the th as we have with the r and the l. And we can see how the language went into two different directions here. Greek one way and Latin the other. Nobody knows exactly how the Minoans pronounce this, but we have a general idea, and that general idea puts us exactly where we need to be, on the nexus between the d and the th sounds in a very old Indo-European word for God. My bet is if we heard the Minoans say this, we'd have trouble figuring it out. We'd have even more trouble saying it back. Let me tell you, if I need to know somebody's lying to me, or telling me a fantastic story that turns out to actually be true, I know that something is inevitably going to come out that will remove the uncertainty. I call it seeing how you behave when you think I can't see you. Remember me talking about the l and the r sounds? Same. So once again, I've busted my Minoan ancestors talking exactly like Aryans. But I'm not done yet. Here are the masculine and feminine forms of God in Latin. They are old, archaic terms, and surprise, they're more like the Minoan. I'd say they're obviously derived from the Minoan. Aunitino, zoaunitino. These are on side B. I also think they show up in libation formulas found outside of the disc in the phrase utinu. I have no idea what that could be. On side B itself, we have a libation formula, at least in part, and the utinu shows up in other libation formulas. Irai napu, zenadiutia. I have only a shaky idea about the first, no idea about the last. Okay, now onto the disc. The first phrase that was striking to me was the very first phrase, words A1 and A2. A means we're looking at side A. Ique paieriu, etuque. Then we skip a couple of words, A5 and 6. Ique noatusa, wathitique. Neither are marked, including wathitique. Okay, let's string these words together. Right off the bat, this construction looks very Latin to me. In fact, I would say obviously Latin. I don't speak Latin, but I can read Wikipedia, so I look up the que suffix and I find this beauty from Virgil. Hominumque ferrarumque, both man and beast. Then I remembered my research on the Minoan-Roman connection, and I remembered an old plaque from the holy site of Lavinium. Here's a tracing so you can get a better look at it. The plaque reads, Castere podluque ique curios. In the business of paleontology, that would be called a transitional form, or a damn good candidate for one. Virgil is a generation or two before the Lord Jesus Christ. This plaque goes way before that. It goes back so far, people were still using the kappa for a K. That eventually became the letter Q, for which it's used here. It goes so far back, the Romans hadn't even decided which direction their alphabet was going to run. This goes from right to left. It goes so far back, Rome probably still had a king. She certainly still had living citizens who remembered living under a king. So running on with this, here's the possible evolution of this conjunction construction. Ique Romeo Juliet que, Romeo Juliet que ique, Romeo que Juliet que. Both Romeo and Juliet are dead. The que is deeply embedded in the Latin language. Ubique, everywhere. Undique, from all sides. Equilateralis, equal sides. And from Wikipedia, from the Proto-Indo-European que and, cognates include Sanskrit ka, Ancient Greek te, Proto-Germanic hu. Okay. In archaic and official language, que is preferred to et, from which it is distinguished by denoting a closer connection. Note again, archaic. Just like the Minoan bears the marks of ancient Latin. So let's string everything together and see if it's a good candidate for a proper both-and construction. Words A1 through A6. Ique paieriu, etuque, auditi, au aupi. Ique noa tu sa, why ditique, why no. Looks good to me. I don't know what the both ands are, but both something and something seem to be going on here. The next is a word that Gareth Owen first brought to the world's attention. Ique curia. It's words A16, A19, and A22. He thinks the ique is Akka, the Great Mother. Entirely possible. She's very old, and the Minoans would certainly know about her. Because recall back to the beginning when I talked about the mark words. Ique curia is marked, but curiaque and curiate are not. I think the word is actually curia, and ique is a prefix. And ique shows up attached to all sorts of words, supporting its prefix status. Ique paieriu, ique noa tu sa, ique theriune, ique sidate, ique ranaka, ique watarariua, ique paie, and of course, ique curia. Notice the two red letter words. I'm happy to report I did this serious treatment on both of these words before I accounted for the fact they were marked up. That tells me they're probably as important as my reading indicated they were. So like I don't speak Latin, I don't speak Greek, but kurios sounded Greek to me. Very familiar. Kuria. Kuria. Where have I heard this before? Kurios. Lord. The Lord Jesus Christ. Kuriou Jesu Christou. The Hebrews call Yahweh Adonai, Lord, and in their Greek translation of the Old Testament we know as the Septuagint, they go ahead and call him Kurios. You see why the Riyah was important? So now we probably have another Minoan word that we thought all along was a Greek word, but the only question was it around in Greek that's this old? I think it was. From the trusty Mycenaean Greek dictionary I downloaded, I found these phrases. Damo koro, the overseer of a village. Go ukoro, cowherds. And once again I remember my research from the Minoan-Roman connection, the Cambridge companion to the Aegean Bronze Age. In charge of each province was a damo koro. Again, the strict meaning is uncertain, but the first element of the word is clearly Greek. And I would say the second element of the word is clearly Minoan. Which brings us right back to the Lavinium plaque, which just keeps getting more interesting. Castere pod luque ique kurios, which looks an awful lot like curia. You even have the ique curia, although that seems to be only by accident. Or not. Maybe they moved the ique back there because it recalled a familiar phrase. The translation that I saw said this was the Greek word for youths. I think it was the Greek word for lords. Castor and Pollux were twins, but only one of the twins was immortal. Nevertheless, they were both lords. Next word, ique paieriu. Here's where all the work we did on the pa comes into play. Because as you'll see, none of this treatment makes sense if we didn't get the right sound value assigned. Here I remind you of the different forms paia has assumed on the disc. on both sides. This is the only word that does show up on both sides, by the way. And here again are all the eque words. And a reminder that eque paieriu and eque curia are together on side A, very important. In fact, on side A, it's the paie words that are built up into a crescendo. A26 through 31. Eque paie, nadate, zuuka. Eque wawa terai sui, paie, zuuka. Notice I said zuuka instead of zuka. That's because both the Minoans and the Romans had a strong syllabic language, as does Spanish today, which is why the Minoans used a syllabary. So all three languages would treat these as two syllables and not one long syllable. This is one of the important details about these languages that strengthen my case that they're all related. That very last part even echoes something said about eque curia. Let's roll this back to A17, A18, and A19. This is obviously parallel to words A29 and A30, which you can see here as well as on the left. Eque wawa terai sui, yo ye, eque curia. And A29 to A30, which we just read and very soon follows, eque wawa terai sui, paie. This looks like a formal title, and the hymn or poem on side A uses that title to equate the two terms. So, curia equals paie. The Lord equals something. From my experience with this stuff, the Lord equals wisdom. This carries very solidly into Christianity. All the talk about Jesus being the Logos and being before all created things, and through whom all things are created, are explicitly said about wisdom in the Old Testament. Let's compare some of the things Jesus says about himself. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know now how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Now let's read from the book of Ben Sira. Now, if you're Protestant, you don't read this book because you've been assured it's a Catholic book. Well, it's also an Orthodox book and a Coptic book. Pretty much every Christian communion but yours accepts it as part of the Bible. Therefore, I accept it as part of the Bible. In any event, after I read this, it'll be obvious Jesus himself read it as well and based his ministry on it. As far as I'm concerned, the case is closed. It's canonical. My child, listen to me and take my advice. Put wisdom's chains around your feet and her yoke around your neck. Carry her on your shoulder and don't be resentful of her bonds. Follow wisdom and keep to her ways with all your heart. Go looking for her, and she will reveal herself to you. Take hold of her, and don't let go. Then you will discover the peace of mind she offers, and she will become your joy. The signs of slavery you wear will become signs of royal majesty. Her chains will be your protection, and you will wear her yoke like a magnificent robe. You will wear wisdom like a splendid crown. Among Protestants, the I am statements of Jesus are well known. Jesus is telling you he's Yahweh, if you pay attention. I call these wisdom statements. Jesus, the Lord, is telling you he's wisdom, if you pay attention. My only problem is, how can I possibly relate paie to any form of the word wisdom in Latin? Turns out I can not only show a connection to the Latin word for wisdom, but the Greek word for wisdom too. On the left, the Latin sapiens, sapientis, a wise person. On the right, the famous Sophia of the Greeks. I told you earlier Sophia would pop up again. From sapiens we can derive pie, and from Sophia, pia. See how the p in Minoan becomes f in Greek? Note that shift didn't happen in the Latin, because the Greek word is a borrowed word, while the Latin word is a cognate. The Phaistos disc shows us there was a lot of wordplay with paie. The most recognizable form is from side B, soti paieriu. Here, sopaie is clearly visible. Both the Latin and the Greek can comfortably derive from that. And let me go out on a limb here. I also see soteriou. Sotir, savior, savior wisdom. Is the riu suffix like our hyphen? Because we saw it earlier with ique paia riu, equal wisdom and savior wisdom. Or maybe wisdom will save? It might be nothing, but then again it might not. I couldn't find anything in the Hittite or Avestan languages that looked anything like paye, but when I looked in the Sanskrit I reeled in a big one, prajna. This is still used for wisdom among Hindus and Buddhists. 2 syllables, pa and ya in both cases. It's possible we simplified this just like we probably softened the Sanskrit arsha to arya. If we did, we wouldn't be the only ones. Later, Pali speakers simplified it to panya, which sounds even more like the Minoan paye. Keep in mind, we don't exactly know how the Minoans pronounced anything. Everything we have is secondhand through Greek pronunciations that we can largely duplicate. I'm sure if experts ever heard real Minoan speakers, they'd be in for a lot of surprises. I suggest there's something about the pra that lent itself to simplification to pa. We saw that in the Pali after all. And on the other hand, the ye in the original spoken Minoan could have had a more nasal nye quality. So, prajna, panye. Sounds good. So side A is a hymn to wisdom and the Lord. It tells us they are one and the same. Side B is also a religious text, but it serves a very different purpose. It's probably related to the libation formula archaeologists have found on peak sanctuaries scattered strategically throughout Crete. They're often found on portable tables like this one. Let's zoom in here. I see a T, Yasasara, U, which we know is the start of Unakanazi from other copies of the formula. Pay careful attention to the Ya and the Sa. They're coming back later. Also, that U at the end is the one I was talking about in the Arkalakori Acts earlier. You can see the hand posture is exactly the same, although you can't really see the stylus it's holding in this image. Dr. Owens specifically directs our attention to the Mount Uktos libation table, labeled IOZA2 on the upper left. This image is on the PDF file he provides online, signary.pdf. These are his markings. Below is the image of the table and how it's laid out that I pulled off of Younger's site. Please note, this is a spiral. The Phaistos disc is a spiral. The Minoans are very attached to spirals. Here's a clean view of the formula as presented by Gorilla. Owen sees a striking resemblance between this specific libation formula and words B17 through B26 on the disc. Here they are. Ipewaye, Aunitino, Aunopa, Auditi, Zoaunitino. Wapinadwa, Tidiute, Tiditi, Tinadiue, Zoaunitino. Now let's bring out the same phrase in the Roman alphabet like we're used to. Now just looking at these should show you why I like syllabaries. By our standard, Minoan looks simple and even childish. But remember, the words below are saying the exact same thing as the symbols above. So by Minoan standards, alphabets make language unnecessarily complicated. Look at all those red letter words. That should tell you something important is going on here. Now let's bring in the libation formula from the Uktos Peak Sanctuary that we just saw a photo of. Ata, Ipewaya, Yadikitu, Yasasarame, Unakanazi, Ipinama, Sirute, Tanarate, Utinu. The Ata typically starts a formula, but it's not on the disc. Neither is the Yasasarame Unakanazi that we just saw on the first tablet. Ironic, since all of these are terms of the Minoan libation formula par excellence. So let's take them all out. They line up what we have with the wording of the disc. Ipewaya and Ipewaya line up nicely. Alditi and Yaldikitu seem close enough, although I'm not so sure about that, since as I said, Alditi might refer to God, while Yaldikitu might refer to Mount Ditka. But then again, Ditka might mean Mountain of God. Wapinadwa, Ipinama. I'm going to have a closer look at these two in a second. Tiriute, Sirute. I'm going to look at those two right afterwards. Tanarate and Tinariue. Not going to look at them. Scholars think this is a verb meaning to offer or something like that. And finally, the Aunitino, Zoaunitino, and Zoaunitino again. Not sure about them, but they line up nicely with Utinu. Incidentally, other libation formulas have Ipiwae here, which is closer to the disc's Ipiwaye. IOZA2 line 2 and IOZA11 both contain utinu. KNZC6 has nitinu. Incidentally, KNZC6 and KNZC7 may both be making fun of the libation formula. They alter it dramatically and may have just reduced it to meaningless gibberish. Even so, that would just show you how well known the formula was to people. Okay, as promised, Wapinadwa and Ipinama. I can't say a lot about that form on the disc right now, so I'll leave it aside. I have definite ideas about Ipinama, which, happy enough for me, has also been seen as Ipinamina. I would like to suggest that we're looking at a compound word here, Ipi and Nama or Nomina. I say that because that became Iphi in the Greek, once again that pa to fa shift as we move from the Minoan to the Greek, and carrying on as nomen or nominus in the Latin, name. We know that in the Greek, Iphios means strong, and happy enough, once again, Iphi is explicitly attached to names, like Iphimedea, a goddess. Remember Medea? Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon in the Iliad, the lord of men. He sacrificed her, by the way. And Iphianassa, a queen. Now let's look at Sirute, Tidiute. Scholars have shown that the te suffix in Minoan often means possession, so it's translated as of or from. So let's go with that. Siru te and Tidiu te. I would like to suggest of or belonging to Sirius, the star, and the divinity. The two terms differ in a perfect way because taken together they lead right to Sirius. We have the C in Siru. We have the T down here, but on the other hand we have the closer Ryu. While we're comparing Indo-European words, I like to look at the Old Avestan name for Sirius, Tistria. As you can see, the Tidiu is here, as is the Siriu. And the Iranians would later simplify this just like we did. The star/divinity is now called Tir. In any event, going back to our trusty IPA table, we see that the sa and the ta are neighbors. So we've got a solid connection between these two words. Now back to these two. I would like to suggest that wapi and ipi are the actual Minoan words for bee, and that will pull everything together nicely. So going back to that first libation table we looked at, these look like perfectly formed spots to offer honey on. There are ways to test for that, happily enough. I hope they do someday. Now, pulling everything we just worked through together, Wapinadwa Tidiute, Ipinama, Ipinamina, Sirute, the powerful name of Sirius. All the sense in the world. There's a complex of associations here that is reflected in Mediterranean mythology, especially on the islands, more so than on mainland Greece. Sirius is associated with medicine. The Greeks and the Romans knew this. Christian doctors acknowledged this well into the Middle Ages. On the peak sanctuaries where the Minoans used their libation formula, we find votive offerings called taumata. The singular is tama. These often included clay figurines of people and body parts. Greek Orthodox Christians still use taumata. Taumata show up in the Old Testament. The Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant. God inflicts them with tumors and possibly mice, whose fleas could have caused the tumors. They consult their priests, who tell them they need to make golden images of the mice and the tumors, and that they need to return the ark to the Israelites along with these images as an offering. This they did. You will note, God accepted their offer. Were I a betting man, I'd say these priests were literate in Linear A. What do you think? There's a long-standing association between Sirius and beekeeping. Yes. And honey, in turn, is often used as a medicine. I use honey to treat wounds. It's a disinfectant and antifungal. There's a long-standing association between honey and strength. We see that once again in the Old Testament. Prince Jonathan is exhausted after combat. He eats some honey and immediately puts a shine in his eyes. Samson kills a lion. When he returns to cover the carcass, he finds bees have built their nests in it. Apparently, the strength of the lion is invested in the honey. From the strong comes something sweet. From the eater comes something to eat. In both cases, the Israelites are dealing with Philistines, and we know where the Philistines are from. As you can see, these associations run deep and they run ancient. They run perhaps all the way back to the Minoans on Crete, if not before. And one other thing. I didn't start looking for these associations on the disc because I knew about them. I looked for these associations on the internet because I followed up on what I found on the disc. And I'm a Christian. I've read the Old Testament several times. And the things I covered here with the Old Testament only started making sense after I uncovered them with my follow-up. There were a lot of light bulb moments for me, I can tell you.
Now to word B28, eternity. I'd like to suggest that it's the Latin eternitas, eternitatis. It's perfectly placed to mean exactly that. Here's the spiraling crescendo that finishes side B, words B27 through B30. Pequiradiuti, eternity, wapinadwa, theti. Something eternal almighty name of God. Classic combo. Now I admit the next two sets are going to be fairly weak. But considering what I've shown about this language, that it's a very old Indo-European one especially, it's not too out of bounds. And some of the specific words I'm actually sure about, even if they are shocking. So here we go. B9 through B11. Zorai dwa, tiatute, irianitu. Here's where the zo and the ria once again loom large. Zarathustra, the Iranian prophet and founder of Zoroastrianism.
I resisted this interpretation because this is 1,000 years too early for Zoroastrianism. Turns out I was wrong, shockingly because Zoroastrians didn't even know how old their religion was. During the time of Alexander the Great, they estimated Zarathustra lived about 700 BC. But scholars now know the Avestan language he spoke was long dead by then. They push it back to about 1300 BC. But if I'm right, he goes back 400 to 500 years before that, and it's very likely some Minoans knew him. We don't know what that third symbol in linear A means, but all the rest lines up very nicely for Zarathustra.
Tiatu, te, once again the possessive, de deatu, deum, of the god. I know I've already said the T is deity, so this is very weak and probably wrong. It's too awkward for one thing, but who knows? This third one, like Zarathustra, I'm confident is right. Iranian, Aryan, noble. Zarathustra, of the god, noble. We're the first Indo-Europeans, unless I'm dead certain we are the Aryans. Swastikas were common on Minoan Crete. The Phaistos disc itself is a riff on the swastika. I don't think it's a coincidence that the first symbol in Irani is a warrior. The second symbol, as we now know, is Riya, which, as I said, originally meant to flow, but came to represent noble lineage and sacred scripture among the original Sanskrit-speaking Hindus. And an Iranian lineage is certainly a noble lineage. We don't know what the Ni is. It could be an olive tree, or maybe it's the two branches of the Aryan tree, one going east, the other going west. On the other hand, the word ends in a tu. That is a horse's ass, so there's that. Though in all fairness, it would be a suffix here, not part of the main word. Further, let's go back to side A. The Lord equals wisdom. Who is the creator god in Zoroastrianism? Ahura Mazda. You've heard of Mazda. The Japanese car company is named after Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda means Lord Wisdom. So the Japanese car company is the Avestan for wisdom. And now let's go back to the Zo symbol. In this world, we see the agency of wisdom, and we see the Lord. We think they are two different beings. They are not. So the libation formula to Sirius now has a deeper context, possibly a Zoroastrian one. In a hymn of the Avesta, incorporated by Ferdowski with due acknowledgement in the Shahnameh, Tistria is involved in a cosmic struggle against the drought-bringing demon Appa-Osha. According to the myth, in the form of a pure white horse, the god did battle with a demon who, in contrast, had assumed the form of a terrifying black horse. Appa-Osha soon gained the upper hand over Tistria, who was weakened from lack of sufficient prayers and sacrifices from humankind. The Yazada proceeded to call upon the creator, Ahura Mazda, who himself then intervened by offering a sacrifice to the overwhelmed god. Infused with the power brought by this sacrifice, Tistria was able to overcome Appa-Osha, and his rains were able to flow to the parched fields and pastures unabated by drought. This story serves to underscore the importance of votive offerings and sacrifice in religious tradition.
Water is a hard scrabble on Crete, which is why Cretans were the first people in the world to build aqueducts. So honey libations to a deity fighting a drought demon make all the sense in the world. And this could explain the old association between honey and strength. Prince Jonathan was exhausted after combat after all. Now, having walked through all this, let's go back to that map of M67s we saw in Part 1.
You see they tend to cluster in the eastern central part of Iran, but you can also see their recent migrants. They came in from the northwest and the southeast. In that clump is the city of Yazd, and Yazd was a refuge for, wait for it, Zoroastrians during the Islamic conquest. So now for the last set on the Phaistos disc I'll be treating here, B15 and B16. One of the words will be pretty solid, not to be confused with proven, obviously. The other is a stretch. Just thought I'd put it out there. Alsaye Theterarisa. I think that second word is pretty straightforward. Theterarisa. Terrestra. From Latin, earth, the world. Maybe that starts it off as a prefix. That first word will take a little work. I give it about 20%. Probably wrong, but don't be surprised if I'm right. For Alsaye, I would like to suggest the Avestan Asha that we find in the Zoroastrian religion. Law. This is the divine law. Asha. Alsaye. Now I'm building on the case I made in Part 2 that connected Arsha and Arya. Let's suppose Alsaye is sort of a hack, a gloss to cover for pronunciation the syllabary doesn't actually represent. Maybe Alsaye is something like Alsier, Asha, Alsier. Who knows? So putting it all back together, we've got Alsaye Theterarisa, or Alsier Theterarisa, the divine law that governs the world. Alrighty then, I've made the best case I can at this point.
Now let's go back to those Hebrew and Philistine documents we looked at when we first started. Remember my ideas about the Greek alphabet? They were later supported by these fragments. The first will be the Aphek fragment from about 1300 to 1200 BC.
This is about 150 years after Linear A was supposed to be extinct, but I think I'm looking at it here. To me, it looks like Pere C, Naro T. I suspect this is the original Linear A and not any of the other varieties because this is the Minoan version of C. Remember, it became the Greek psi. The P on the top left is upside down. The iffy one on the bottom left could be a modified na or the. Now my reading isn't a slam dunk. Here we see the fragment as transcribed by Dr. Itamar Singer on the left. When I look at it like this, the pattern breaks down. The big line for the P on the upper left now looks like a word divider, for example. The C that impressed me so much isn't as tight. It's harder to tell where one symbol ends and the other begins. Though in all fairness, his transcription does seem to violate the unity of the script that's striking at first glance. Now we're looking at the original alphabet of the city of Ugarit. This is probably the first alphabet ever created. We had trade relations with them, and they went down with us in the Bronze Age collapse. Both scripts look funny, because they're using a cuneiform technique, the first type of writing ever created. As you can see, however, none of the symbols on the fragment look anything like the Ugaritic characters, while it's so blatantly Minoan to me despite the odd technique, at first glance anyway. Ugarit is right up the coast from Aphek, and this fragment was created before the city was annihilated by the Sea People. So I wonder if we had someone literate from Ugarit playing around with the Linear A syllabary. The next is the Ashkelon fragment from about the same time. I don't understand the image on the far right, but I can read the block of text well enough. Sa-wa, pa-e, read the wa. The saw on the far left is questionable because it looks like the saw, but it's too boxy. Typically it's a fish, but it does have a body and a tail. The symbol after that, wa, is missing a third stripe down on the bottom middle, but that could be because the paint is so thick, it wouldn't look right. The dwa on the far right was completely unrecognizable at first, but after playing around with different options, I finally realized it's a boat. It's crescent-shaped, it's got a mast sticking up from the center, and it's got oars poking out on both ends. Gareth identifies that symbol as the dwa, and if you look through its various incarnations, you see every one of those elements at one time or another. Now, back to the Isbet Sarta Abecedary, the first fully written example of our alphabet archaeologists have been able to get their hands on.
It's full of simplified linear A symbols. To be fair, this is the Proto-Canaanite writing people talk about that is supposed to have been the precursor for the alphabet. I would like to point out, however, that although some of the symbols here do show up in the alphabet, we were already in Palestine, and we already had diplomatic and trade relations with Egypt for at least 200 years by the time this was written. Furthermore, we'd been using our syllabary even longer, so they could have just as easily gotten all of this from us. Nevertheless, despite all that, the connection between Linear A and the early alphabet is far stronger than the connection between the early alphabet and Proto-Canaanite. Rho, Sa again, Que, simplified. Every time these images drift from the Minoan, they simplify, just like the Linear A symbols that made their way into the Greek alphabet. The fact that we even have a trend is important. Se, Ka, Ya, simplified. Ke, Ni, and Ri from the Cypriot syllabary. Qui, its neutral form of the Minoan sheephead. They also have female and male versions. Zo, the Minoan. Its presence plays right into my argument that some of the Philistines kept to the old religion. Tha, Su, Na. The Minoans always had dots for some reason. The Cypriots cleaned that up, as did the Israelites, apparently. Re and E. I throw this one in because even though the Aleph in the Hebrew alphabet has clear roots in older Canaanite script, it nevertheless bears a strong resemblance to this Philistine character from Ashkelon. And you will notice the modern English and Greek letter A's look exactly like it. In fact, nowhere in the West do we ever see the A symbol oriented sideways like that. It's always straight up and down.
I'd be surprised if any of the symbols in the alphabet sounded anything like the original Minoan. They were probably arranged with the Semitic vocabulary in mind. What's important is whoever put this together was probably literate in at least one of the Cretan syllabaries. I have to say, finding these fragments late in the game like this really put some wind in my sails. Every hunch I had about Linear A and its connection with the Greek alphabet was handsomely supported. Not to say I'm right, but I'm a very good bet.